Recent export control measures against Japan have triggered one of the most serious economic crises in Japan's modern industrial history. On January 6, China's Beijing announced a comprehensive ban on exporting dual-use items to Japanese military users or for military purposes. This restriction covered rare earths, gallium, germanium, high-precision machine tools, and special metals, over 1,000 critical materials in total. The very next day, China launched an anti-dumping investigation against Japanese chemical products, specifically dichloroethane, with an investigation period of 1 year that could be extended by an additional 6 months. Within just 48 hours, China had delivered 2 consecutive economic blows to Japan, leaving Tokyo's government and business community completely off guard and scrambling for immediate solutions. The market reaction was swift and brutal. Shares of Shin-Etsu Chemical and Mitsui Chemicals hit their daily limit down immediately. Toyota and Honda both saw stock prices fall by more than 5%. Investors recognized the danger instantly. Without a steady supply of Chinese rare earths and critical materials, Japan's famous production lines could not sustain normal operations for long. Industry estimates warned that if Japan failed to secure alternative sources within 3 months, core sectors including electric motor manufacturing, semiconductor equipment, precision machine tools, military electronics, and radar systems could all face a systemic shutdown, resulting in an economic loss of approximately 660 billion yen. A procurement director at a major electronics company publicly admitted that 70% of the company's orders came from China, and all of them had now been halted, completely disrupting production planning across the board. To understand why this crisis struck Japan so deeply, one must examine Japan's fundamental industrial structure. Japan has built its global economic reputation on world-class precision manufacturing, automotive production, semiconductor equipment, and industrial robotics. These high-end sectors form the core pillars of Japan's export-driven economy. However, behind every one of these sophisticated industries lies a critical dependency on rare earth elements, materials essential for permanent magnet motors, radar systems, electric vehicle batteries, and countless other advanced technologies. Japan, despite being a nation of over 6,800 islands, has identified domestic rare earth reserves of only around 50,000 tons, just 0.6% of the global total. These deposits are small, low-grade, and have essentially no commercial mining value, making Japan structurally and permanently dependent on rare earth imports. This is not the first time China has used rare earths as a geopolitical weapon against Japan. Back in 2010, a collision between a Chinese fishing boat and Japanese Coast Guard vessels near the Senkaku Islands sparked a diplomatic crisis. China responded by effectively suspending rare earth exports to Japan for approximately 7 weeks through controlled export quotas and delayed approvals. The impact was devastating. Japanese automotive and battery manufacturers were forced to shut down production lines, and exports of key products dropped sharply. Japan ultimately released the detained Chinese fishing boat captain, and rare earth shipments resumed around 3 months later. That 2010 episode was a clear and direct warning that Japan acknowledged but never fully resolved. Following that crisis, Japan invested heavily in a supply diversification strategy over the next decade. Japanese companies jointly invested in Australia's Linus project, signed long-term procurement agreements, developed alternative magnet materials, reduced heavy rare earth usage in permanent magnet motors, and built rare earth recycling programs. At its lowest point of dependency, China's share of Japan's rare earth imports dropped to around 58%. However, these efforts ultimately fell short. Light rare earths found partial alternatives, but heavy rare earths, the most strategically important category, remained almost impossible to source elsewhere. Recycling programs recovered some material but at costs several times higher than normal import. By 2023, Japan's total rare earth imports stood at 7,784 tons, of which 5,700 tons, roughly 70%, still came from China. More than a decade of diversification efforts had failed to break the fundamental dependency. The reason China's dominance is so difficult to challenge is that its advantage goes far beyond simply possessing large mineral reserves. Many countries hold larger rare earth deposits than China. What makes China truly irreplaceable is its complete mastery of the entire rare earth industrial chain, from mining and separation to refining, processing, and manufacturing of final materials. China leads the world in separation technology, refining capacity, cost control, and the institutional ability to manage environmental pressures. No other country has replicated this complete chain at competitive scale, which is why even nations with significant mineral deposits cannot realistically replace Chinese supply in any meaningful timeframe. The political trigger for this latest escalation was Japan's assertive stance on Taiwan. Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi publicly declared that if China used military force against Taiwan and threatened Japan, it could constitute a survival-threatening situation for Japan. Beijing viewed these remarks as a direct challenge to its core sovereignty positions. After China issued formal warnings, Japan's leadership not only refused to retract the statements but repeated them on multiple public occasions. China's response followed a deliberate sequence, first banning Japanese aquatic product imports, then cutting off rare earth supplies, and now launching the anti-dumping investigation into Japanese chemicals. Each step was a calculated escalation designed to impose growing economic pain on Japan. Japan's most ambitious long-term response has been dispatching its deep-sea exploration vessel Chikyu to waters near Minamitarishima Island, where deep-sea mud contains rare earth concentrations dozens of times higher than land deposits, reserves potentially large enough to supply Japan for hundreds of years. Since these waters fall within Japan's exclusive economic zone, the resources legally belong to Japan. However, the practical obstacles are enormous. Mining at 6,000 meters depth is extraordinarily expensive, ecologically damaging, and would attract strong international diplomatic resistance. Most critically, even if Japan successfully extracts raw ore from the ocean floor, it still lacks the separation, refining, and processing infrastructure to turn that material into usable industrial rare earths, a process that still runs through Chinese factories and laboratories. In conclusion, China's export controls have exposed a deep and structural vulnerability in Japan's economic model. A nation celebrated worldwide for technological excellence and industrial sophistication remains dangerously dependent on a single foreign supplier for the raw materials that make all of that excellence possible. With most Japanese companies holding only 2 to 3 months of inventory, the clock is ticking. Unless Japan secures a diplomatic resolution with Beijing or achieves a genuine breakthrough in alternative sourcing, it faces the very real risk of significant industrial contraction, brought not by any failure of innovation, but by a resource chokehold that years of strategic planning failed to break.